Sir, we're editor-in-chief of Yahoo Finance, and welcome to our second election 2020 special presented to you in conjunction with HuffPost and Yahoo News. Tonight could be one of the most consequential dates on the political calendar in many years, as Donald Trump and Joe Biden are set to meet in Cleveland for their first debate. To look ahead to tonight, I'm joined, as I will be each week, by my co-hosts, Yahoo News editor-in-chief Dan Kleidman and HuffPost Washington bureau chief Amanda Turkle. Welcome, you guys.
Good to be back with you.
So let me start with you this week, Dan, and ask you what you're going to be looking for in this evening's debate.
Well, look, Donald Trump is pretty far behind in this race, both in national polls and in the battleground states. So it's really going to be up to him to have to sort of shake this thing up and change the dynamic. So what I'm going to be looking for is to see how Joe Biden handles Trump. First of all, he can't make any big mistakes. He has to seem competent, fluent in his language, which hasn't always been easy for him during these debates. I think what he needs to do is come off as a plausible president. And if he does that, I think he's going to do well. Expectations are low for him, partly because the Trump campaign and President Trump himself have set those expectations very low. One thing that I'm going to be looking for is to see how he handles the personal attacks that we know will be coming at him from President Trump, because that's the way President Trump debates. And there have been a lot of people who've said he shouldn't take the bait. He'll get rattled. It's not anger is not his best side. I agree with all of that. I also, though, think that there may be a moment for some sort of a flash of controlled anger. If Trump comes after his sons, either Hunter or the late Beau Biden, I think if Biden shows a little bit of anger there in defense of his own children, that might actually help him. It'll energize Democrats. It might even get some of the fence sitters off of the fence. But it has to be controlled.
Amanda, what about you?
Biden has done a great job so far of staying on message. We haven't seen a ton of Biden because of the coronavirus pandemic and the fact that his campaign has, shut down big rallies. And when Biden has appeared, it's been in much more controlled formats. He hasn't been doing press conferences or anything like that. While he's been doing that, Trump has been out there just spouting off, different messages every single day and seeing what'll stick. Biden has been staying on the coronavirus. He has been staying lately on healthcare, especially with the Supreme Court. And the question will be, is Biden going to let Trump get under his skin? Is he going to, as Dan was talking about, succumb to, anger if Trump attacks his family? And I agree that's showing some emotion about that could actually be a good thing, because that's how many people connect with Joe Biden. But he can't let Trump throw him off course. And that's what Trump does during debates. That's what he did when he was a presidential candidate running against other Republicans. That's what he did against Hillary, is he tries to be a bully to make the other people look silly or weak.
Just picking up on what Dan said earlier, Amanda, that Biden is actually the front runner. And that's a curious position to be in. And I asked former presidential candidate and former Secretary of State John Kerry yesterday if he thought the Biden campaign was confident or maybe even overconfident. Here's what John Kerry had to say.
Well, let me tell you something. I was allegedly winning, and our polls showed that I was winning in the last week, until an Osama bin Laden tape appeared on Friday before the election. So am I sanguine? No, not in the least, and nor is he. Nobody in the Biden campaign is taking anything for granted. They don't watch the polls day to day. They're going to go, full speed ahead to the last day and last moment. And that's the only way to campaign today. And I think Joe understands that. But I think his campaign is well-funded now. I think he has a great sense of why he's running. And I think in the debate tomorrow, people will get a great sense of Joe Biden.
Dan, let me go over to you and ask you, though, about one issue that hasn't come up yet, which is huge, I think, which is President Trump's taxes and those bombshell articles from the New York Times. Is that going to be a factor?
It is going to be a factor. It is clearly going to come up. Chris Wallace is certainly going to make it a factor. I wouldn't be shocked if that's the first question he asks. It is a way for Biden to get under Trump's skin because it goes directly at the Trump brand that he has been carefully cultivating all these years, that he is the this amazing businessman and mogul. The Times report suggests that that is not at all true. It also will allow Biden to make some kind of populist arguments, because this is a person who's only for I think 10 out of 15 years didn't pay taxes, paid $750 in taxes when he was running, and then the first year of his presidency. So you may hear the Scranton versus Park Avenue argument that Joe Biden has been waging. But I will say I don't think that Biden is going to make that issue front and center throughout this debate, because for Biden, what's really important is to make people know who he is, what kind of president he would be, and to keep the focus on policy issues, on coronavirus, and building a stronger economy coming out of the pandemic. So it's going to come up for sure. I don't think it'll dominate the debate.
All right, I'm glad you brought up the COVID pandemic, because we're going to be talking a lot more about that in this hour. But let's take a break. When we come back, we'll be joined by Shirish Date of HuffPost. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're now joined by HuffPost senior White House correspondent Shirish Date. Shirish, you've been gaming out different things President Trump could do if he stays behind in the polls and gets, well, really more desperate between now and Election Day. How could that play out in the weeks ahead, or even tonight in the debate?
Well, the president likes to attack. He likes to say whatever he thinks is going to get him ahead in that moment. I've been to several of his rallies, over the summer and spring, even when he wasn't having that many. There were now they've become these airport things. And they're an amazing thing to be in because there is no relationship to reality whatsoever while he's up there talking. And the thing is, those only reach a certain number of people, the people who actually come out to them, who of course are going to vote for him, and those in the immediate media market where the news TV stations are covering them. I don't know how much that gets out to the world at large. He is in a bind here because he spent the last 6 months painting Joe Biden as senile, as having dementia, unable to do basic tasks, hiding in his basement, et cetera. Now, all Vice President Biden has to do is come out and put a few words together in a sentence, and he undoes a lot of that right away. I'm reminded of that debate back in 1980 when Jimmy Carter had spent months saying Ronald Reagan is dangerous, he's a nut, he could get us into a nuclear war. And then Reagan got up there. They only had one debate. He got up there and seemed pretty reasonable. And that was that. People who were kind of worried about Reagan, maybe he's not ready for this job. It broke heavily in his favor, and he won in a landslide. We could see a similar thing happen in the coming weeks.
Hey, Shirish. So can you talk a little bit about what the Trump campaign is doing today in advance of the debate? I've seen some things about how they're floating that Biden wants to wear an earpiece so he can take direction from his aides, about how he might be on performance-enhancing drugs. Can you talk a little bit about what the Trump campaign is doing?
Well, it's important to remember there's the Trump campaign and then there's Donald Trump. And sometimes he forces the campaign to do the stuff that he thinks is a genius idea at that moment. One of those is accusing Biden of being on drugs. Okay, I mean, that came from Donald Trump. And I don't think that the Trump campaign has pushed that very heavily. They did say, well, how come he doesn't answer the question? I don't really understand the point of throwing this mud on the wall, hours before the first debate. I mean, normal human beings aren't watching the news all day. They're not watching cable TV all day. They're certainly not on Twitter all day. And those who are clearly, and maybe the only ones in America who haven't made up their minds, maybe tuning in for the very first time tonight at 9:00. So yeah, the Trump campaign has been saying a bunch of silly stuff, and I don't know to what end other than to pass the day or make their boss happy, because I don't see how it possibly helps them.
Hey, Shirish, just following up on that, and then I have another quick question. One of the things that I've seen some Trump campaign people saying is there are going to be mystery guests at the debate. And some people will remember 4 years ago at one of the Hillary Clinton Trump debates, they brought in some of the women who Bill Clinton had sexually harassed to try to get inside Hillary's head. That was after the Hollywood Access tape. Have you heard anything at all about anything like that the Trump campaign might do?
No, I have not, honestly. And, again, I'm not sure what giant effect having those women at that second debate had. The bigger issue, of course, was the Access Hollywood tape and Donald Trump in his own voice saying that, yeah, his celebrity allowed him to do all kinds of things, including grabbing women by the genitals. So maybe they might have some grand scheme to do something like that. I don't know if it would work. And one thing that's different is we don't have Steve Bannon on this campaign. He's got his own issues to worry about right now. So we don't have the number one
provocateur.
Yeah, right.
And I think that might have actually been his idea. Actually,
oh, absolutely,
to think of it.
It was his
just
idea. Yeah.
A very quick follow-up, just kind of on the basic blocking and tackling of campaigns. One thing that I have not heard a lot of talk about is turnout in this election, except that everyone says it's going to be massive.
Right.
Donald Trump drove a ton of turnout, last time around, particularly in, working class areas in Pennsylvania and in the upper Midwest states. Do you think that his turnout machine and his ability to drive turnout is going to make this, in the end, a closer election than it looks right now, especially since we're in a pandemic and we know that the Biden campaign has not been doing nearly as much on the ground organizing?
Right. Well, last time around, it was the Clinton campaign that had the much bigger and better traditional turnout machine. They're the ones who'd gone to the doors. They're the ones who'd mailed pieces. They're the ones who had the volunteers with the, with the iPads, with what are your interests, and let's give you this personalized message. And it was a Trump campaign. That was a disaster. I mean, they were relying on the RNC. They had nothing of their own. And still, they got an organic turnout on Election Day. I was watching a particular county in Central Florida with that in mind, and they blew the doors off of the expected number they were going to get. It wasn't because they were out turning people out. That just happened. So I don't know if the Trump campaign's big advantage this time around in having the traditional ground game, so to speak, is gonna matter. It didn't help Hillary Clinton as much as it might have last time. So we'll see. I mean, people understand that there's a pandemic, that it's not necessarily safe to go out and hang around with other people. They don't really want a bunch of strangers knocking on their door. So I'm not sure that the normal rules apply on that.
Yeah, and of course, the candidates are preparing and have been preparing for days and days. Let's listen to President Trump talk a little bit about debate prep.
But we had a little debate prep before we came here. I think this whole thing, though, is debate prep. What I do is debate prep every day. I'm taking questions from you people all the time. I mean, I've taken a lot of questions from you over the last number of years, and he doesn't.
Yeah, that's right. I guess that's one way to look at it. We're going to take a break. Sharice, thank you so much for joining us. Up next, we'll take a look at how doctors are getting more and more political this year. That's right, doctors. Welcome back. We're now joined by Yahoo Finance's Anjali Kemlani, who has been reporting on different ways that doctors' groups are forming to be politically engaged in ways we've never seen before. Doctors' groups. Anjali, what have you been finding out?
That's correct, Andy. So what we've seen is that there are a number of groups forming. Before, early on in the pandemic, we sort of saw this informal grouping, or just doctors getting to know each other and elevating their voices really on social media platforms. And that has escalated into actual organized groups. So for example, we already know that there exists a group called the National Medical Association. They represent Black doctors. And what they're doing is banding together to assess the vaccines, claiming that there is so much erosion of trust in the federal government bodies that are supposed to be looking at this, the FDA specifically, that they feel the need to look out for African Americans and minorities and assess the data from these vaccines. We already heard today, for example, that Pfizer is being asked by a number of health experts to wait just another month to observe the effect of their vaccine. So similarly, you're seeing that. Meanwhile, there's other groups like Doctors for Biden that has formed to support Joe Biden, but they've also talked about, crossing party lines. They're inviting Republicans, independents, et cetera, to get on board as well. And then there's a group called DOCS, which stands for Doctors Organized to Communicate Science. And their whole entire goal is to monitor debates like the one tonight, as well as the conventions, and help to sort of fight back against the misinformation, especially when it comes to the healthcare space. And of course, we know that it is so relevant because of the global pandemic and because of all the missteps that we've seen from the administration.
Anjali, one thing I wonder is clearly doctors and healthcare professionals more generally are part of our consciousness in a way that they've never been before, every day for every American, which gives them a certain amount of power and I guess responsibility. And I guess the question I have is, given that there has been so much criticism of the Trump administration for politicizing public health, stories day after day about pressuring the CDC, for example. I wonder if that has energized any of these healthcare professionals and doctors in particular to come forward and get involved because they are concerned about how healthcare and health policy has been politicized during this pandemic.
That is, I think you're clearly seeing that, especially later into the pandemic. The political pressure plays a role. Early on, it was simply a matter of the 24-hour news cycle demanding more professionals from the health and science space, science included. We saw the Scientific American for the very first time endorsing a presidential candidate in Joe Biden. And so that speaks to kind of where we're at in terms of these fields that have largely remained apolitical and feel the need to come forward. So while we used to have, that one talking head doctor that was polished with their sound bites for anything medical, we now have such a broad array of individuals who have really cut their teeth in the media industry by now and are able to really articulate some of the issues and concerns, both political and non, and really stick to, the core of their values in the field of really making sure that they look at the information. And one key point that one of them brought up is that, in science and in healthcare, you're willing to sort of rectify any missteps or are humble enough. We've often heard Dr. Anthony Fauci talk about being humble enough in front of this virus. And so I feel like that sentiment sort of carries throughout with these professionals that I talk to, where you're willing to step back and say, okay, that was incorrect. And we're watching this scientific process just play out in a way that under a really bright spotlight that it's never been under before.
Anjali, you talked a little bit about a group trying to cross party lines a bit, but have you seen the doctors who are getting politically involved, whether it's just activism or running for office, has it been more heavily on the Democratic side, or have there been, sort of pro-Republican groups and politicians too?
It has been across lines, yes. I think a majority of the focus has been, and what I've been privy to at least, has been more on the Democratic side. You see those who are concerned about the future of the health plans and the Affordable Care Act, as well as women's rights. So I think that, all encompassing, it is focused largely on the Democratic side, but there have been groups. So for example, we saw, right, America's Frontline Doctors, that was a little bit more conservative, and they were focusing on the hydroxychloroquine issue. So there have been, groups that have emerged on both sides, but I think largely the focus has been on those on the Democratic side.
Anjali, have you thought at all about how COVID is going to enter into the debate tonight? What types of questions and how the candidates might respond to them?
I definitely have wondered what kinds of questions will be asked, whether it is about the vaccine timeline. I'm sure that's going to be coming up, and the regulatory bodies as well. Other than that, I mean, it really is going to be really interesting to see just what kinds of questions asked, whether it's about a national strategy, masking, that has been a debate. There's so many topics to really choose from. I don't know if they'll be able to get to them all.
Anjali, what do you think the majority of doctors out there want to actually hear at this debate from these two candidates? What are they going to want to hear Joe Biden talk about?
One of the key things that continues to be an issue, and that has been largely called for from many of the medical experts that I've talked to, is a national strategy. At this point in time, we still have very much almost a city by city strategy on how to deal with the outbreak. And while that is warranted because certain hotspots will emerge, there hasn't really been sort of a guidelines of, if your area is a hotspot, these are the things to do. And so I think that has been sort of the key call out from the experts that I've been talking to, that's missing and could be a really important key to really curbing the outbreak and helping the country move away from being #1 in the world.
Anjali, polls have shown that increasingly Republicans are more distrustful of experts and the scientific community. What ramifications do you think that could have on, science, just generally trusting scientific experts, doctors, or, even a potential COVID vaccine?
I think that your question kind of answers itself. It's all encompassing in that realm of the mistrust for vaccines, not following, the rules and guidelines that are that they do try to impose in some areas. And I think that largely speaks to early on the observation of red states, if you will, were the ones who weren't necessarily following the rules as strictly, and therefore saw surges later on and are continue to be lax, to be honest, in some areas. And so I think that you're already seeing that the poll indicates what is already happening and already a reality in the country.
All right, Anjali, thank you so much for that great insight. Coming up next, Yahoo News national politics reporter Brittany Shepard will join us. Stay tuned. We're now joined by Brittany Shepard of Yahoo News. Brittany, what is going to be the approach from each side tonight when the subject turns to the ongoing pandemic?
Well, Joe Biden is certainly going to make sure that every time an ancillary topic is brought up, it is always tied back to coronavirus. His advisors have told us this much. Every time Joe Biden speaks publicly about the president, always all roads essentially lead to what he believes to be the president's bungling of his coronavirus response. As far as the president is concerned, his narratives about COVID have been a bit more far-fetched. We know that, he's been promising a vaccine any day now. I'm sure he'll bring that up again. I think the president, whenever he speaks about coronavirus, is a little bit more self-reflective. I'll put it that way. Talks a lot about his administration's perceived accomplishments, shutting down the border for travel from China, Europe, et cetera, et cetera. And, something about both of these septuagenarians is that nothing new usually comes from them. They're the patterns that we hear out in the field are the patterns I believe that we're going to be hearing tonight.
Yeah, Brittany, I feel like, what Trump is saying on the coronavirus just changes constantly. There was, first there was no coronavirus really, and it would be gone right away. Then it's like, well, it happened and we conquered it and it's over. Now it's like, well, it's around, but it's not really hurting kids. Trump was downplaying it, then he wasn't. What seems to be the if there is one, what seems to be the main approach and strategy the Trump campaign is taking on coronavirus these days? Have they settled on an approach and a talking point?
Well, Amanda, you're absolutely right. The president and his campaign have been all over the place. The targets seem to move and the goalposts seem to move, miles and miles away each time. It's hard to try to understand what the objective might be. I think a lot of it is throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks with voters, what can villainize Joe Biden in the most effective way for them and what makes them look the best. Obviously, with this Bob Woodward book coming out and audio being released of President Trump saying that he was intentionally downplaying or mischaracterizing the coronavirus threat to the public, there are a lot of arrows on the president and on the White House and the Trump campaign. And certainly, they know they're slipping. They know Joe Biden is lapping them in certain coronavirus hotspots. So I think that's why we're seeing stuff all over the map. And it's kind of difficult to understand where he might go next. But I think a good prediction is perhaps into the absurd.
Brittany, what have you been able to learn about the Biden campaign's debate prep? We know that they've had a lid on the campaign for a few days as he prepares. We know he's got a very experienced debate team led by Ron Klain, who's been with Biden for a long time, and I think actually played Donald Trump in some of the debate prep. But how have they been getting him ready? And what do they think are the big opportunities for Biden, and what are the risks?
So, Dan, Biden's debate prep is kind of extended from his daily coronavirus and economic prep. At least 3 or 4 times a week, he has an hour call with economic advisors and medical advisors on the state of play, on the economy, and on coronavirus. So Joe Biden has started with large pamphlets to go through, all the subject matters that he wants to. And then from studying his books, he's moved on to mock debates. You're right, with Ron Klain, who used to wear a big baggy Trump suit and question Joe Biden. I think the theatrics have gone down this year, but he's been in several days of extensive prep, different folks playing different parts of Trump's administration, and just to try to, pin him against the wall and see what Joe Biden can do. I think crucially that why he's called these really early lids some days is because Joe Biden takes things very personally, especially if you bring up his family. Or I think you might hear from the Trump campaign or for Joe Biden himself, from Donald Trump himself, bringing up, accusations of sexual assault by Tara Reade to Joe Biden. And the campaign knows that Joe Biden can bungle. He can speak for a very long time. He can go off topic. He wasn't the strongest debater in Democratic primaries. And so Joe Biden has allotted a lot of time, tried to stay on message, keep it tight and keep it right. I think the question is, can he do that? Can he clear the low bar that Donald Trump has given him without, getting in his own way? And I'm not really sure what's going to happen tonight, like I said, especially if Beau Biden comes up or Tara Reade comes up.
Brittany, we've been talking about COVID-19 all evening here, and of course, really since March. And you wonder if there's any fatigue setting in, and that's an issue I think that even Joe Biden was wondering about. Here's what he had to say about that.
What worries me now is we've been living with this pandemic for so long, I worry we're risking becoming numb to the toll that is taken on us and our country and communities like this. We can't let that happen. We can't lose the ability to feel the sorrow and the loss and the anger for so many lives lost. We can't let the numbers become statistics, a background noise, just a blur that we see in the nightly news.
And Brittany, it sort of speaks to this question that I think a lot of us have, which is, hasn't everyone already made up their minds? And is there a way that actually either candidate can move the needle? And who do you think can best do that tonight?
Well, that's the $1 million question. I mean, we're in election season. There's no longer an election day. Over 1 million Americans have already voted, right? I think this time in 2016, I think it was 10,000. Just that number is such a stark increase, how many people are voting absentee, voting by mail. There's not a lot of folks left to convince. I think the number of vulnerable swing state is under 10% of all voters. I think that Donald Trump has a lot to prove to those 10% of voters that the last couple weeks of the campaign is not a referendum on his presidency, right? A lot of times he's going to be having to play defense. He knows that Joe Biden has more money than him right now. He knows that Joe Biden is lapping him in polls in crucial states right now. So I think a lot of what tonight means is for the candidates to prove things to themselves and to their base. Because like I said, so many people have already voted. And a lot of folks who I talk to feel like they have fatigue because so many folks have already died. 200,000 Americans have died. Many, many more are sick. Look at a state like Florida that has essentially said, no more lockdown. Folks, go out and do what you can when you want. People kind of forget that this is something that's affecting the entire country. And they vote with, their own gut, and they vote against their single issue. So if tonight's going to move the needle for anyone, it's for folks with fat pocketbooks who can donate more money in the 11th hour to push more ads, to get more space, to hit that really narrow target of 10% of the voters who haven't made up their mind yet in order to kind of cross that finish line.
So Brittany, one topic we haven't talked about yet that we've been told will come up tonight is race and violence, which is not my words, it's how it's been billed. How do you think that will play out, and which candidate do you see having an advantage on this issue?
Well, I think it's going to play out one of two ways. From the Trump campaign and from Trump himself, you're going to hear a lot of talk of law and order. When he goes to cities affected by all cities are affected by racism and police brutality, but when he goes to cities of those high profile, he meets with law enforcement because that plays to his base. And, honestly, the president has said many questionable things about folks who aren't white, and the internet's memory is long, and so is the moderator. So like I said before, I think he has a lot to play defensive on. One of his guests tonight is Alice Marie Johnson. She is a Black woman, a nonviolent drug offender who he and Kim Kardashian and Kanye West, funny enough, helped get out of prison and commute her sentence. So if he's asked by Chris Wallace, well, you said this, that, and the other, racially insensitive thing, he could point to his audience and say, well, look, all this good I did for criminal justice, something that him and his campaign like to repeat again and again and again. Joe Biden, of course, likes to talk a little bit about how he actually doesn't want to defund the police, something Donald Trump will very likely bring up and say, actually, he's a friend of law enforcement. He wants to give more money to those folks, though he also tries to do a job of being empathetic towards Black pain, though there are lots of progressives who say that Joe Biden does not go anywhere far enough.
So many points to be looking for this evening, Brittany. Thank you so much for joining us and for pointing them out to us. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, we'll be joined by Dr. Eric Topol, a medical researcher and executive vice president of Scripps Research. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We're now joined by Dr. Eric Topol, who is the Executive Vice President of Scripps Research. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you.
So scientists have criticized President Trump's handling of the coronavirus, but isn't it the case that in a country like the United States, which is so big, so diverse, and has such a love of individualism, if you will, it's actually kind of a tough job to do that in this country?
Well, not at all, really, because the first step would be to have the testing capacity from the get-go in January, so you get ahead of the outbreak, so you don't have millions of cases like we do now. So the problem we had from the beginning was not taking this very seriously, and so once you get in a hole, a deep hole that we're in, it's much harder to get out. So many countries around the world, not just island nations, were able to do this very effectively. And when they started to see cases, they were able to suppress that and get containment.
Hi, Doctor. I was wondering if you could talk more about how you think a potential vaccine would play out and how it would be received. You know, we have people on the right. Polls show that there's growing skepticism of the medical community and experts. But you also have people on the left who believe that Trump has politicized the CDC and many, scientific agencies and health agencies in the federal government. So how worried are you that if there is a vaccine, how sound would it be? And would people be willing to get vaccinated?
Well, the vaccine programs are really exciting because in such a short time, I mean, truly unprecedented, we've made so much progress on vaccines that will induce a really strong antibody response, some of which will also engender good T cell response. So that part looks great. And these trials, ranging from 30,000 to 60,000 participants, are going to get definitive answers as long as they go to completion. And that's the problem, is that we have a president who is saying that we would have a emergency approval even before potentially the election. And we also know that that's not possible to do That would be cutting corners. That would be shortcuts. It's going to take well into the rest of this year to get the answers on multiple vaccine trials. But hopefully, by the end of the year or beginning of the next year, we'll have safe and effective, compelling evidence. And that'll be really important for us to be able to get an exit strategy out of the pandemic.
Dr. Topol, we've already talked a lot on this show about distrust in science, polarization, denialism, all of these issues that, frankly, Donald Trump and his White House has, I think, kind of raised for a lot of people and a lot of health professionals. Donald Trump may lose the election on November 3rd. So the question I have is, these are forces that are coursing through American society and politics. And so I guess at a slightly more cosmic level, how do you think about, beyond the Trump administration, dealing with these challenges going forward? Public health professionals. I mean, one of the strengths of our system is that public health has not been politicized, and we see the impact when it is. So, what do we do about it?
Well, the point you made earlier is, how would we have navigated through this effectively? If you look at all the places around the world that have done really great in terms of their performance against the virus, they had science lead the way. They had the right whole strategy of getting the virus under containment, and then the economy follows. So here we had a flip of that, and that is a real problem. The other issue is, even if there is a change of leadership, we still have a critical time of 4 months to go to see that leadership take hold, no less to see it start to affect the changes of letting science lead the way. So, this is a real problem because there's nothing going on right now that's going to help us get suppression of the infections and the spread. It's starting to surge again just now in recent days. And, we really have so many things that need to come into play in order for us to achieve a much better status in this country that's taking on this virus effectively.
Dr. Topol, let me ask you, if you were the moderator of the debate this evening, what question would you ask President Trump and Joe Biden?
Well, I guess the first thing would be, what are the immediate strategies that you have in place, or would put in place right now to get this pandemic under control? I'd like to hear about having home rapid testing in every household, supplying masks for every household. I'd like to hear about revving up these neutralizing antibodies and other treatments that look promising. And of course, getting the vaccines with compelling evidence and not having any shortcuts. Those are the sort of things I'd be looking for from both candidates.
Dr. Topol, so we now know what you would ask the candidates at the debate. I'm wondering, what would you say, or what do you say, maybe you have these conversations, to people who are a little bit skeptical of public health and saying, I don't need a mask. It's not any worse than the flu. So what do you say to people to try to convince them that you should pay attention to science?
Right. Well, unfortunately, some of this, what you're asking about, is the modeling of our president and some of the people that have been supporting that are in governmental capacity. So normally, if we had the usual CDC, FDA, NIH, all these government public health agencies that are leading the way, we wouldn't have such questioning. So it's hard at this point to undo these questions like you're asking. Are masks helpful? They're not just helpful, they're one of our principal, if not the principal strategy. And we're going to need masks even during the vaccine implementation phase next year, because masks are really important. This is a respiratory transmission virus through speech and breathing. And that's how we get the virus from one person to another, or potentially even beyond to many people. So they're so simple to wear a mask, yet there's so many people that refuse. And that's something that we have to get over, because the idea is we're trying to work together, a social contract to help each other. And so we need each other to do that, just as we need eventually a vaccine to support by the vast majority of people, because these are the types of strategies ranging from the lowest tech of a mask to the most advanced tech of a vaccine, that if we do this together, we will put this pandemic behind us much faster.
Dr. Topol, Andy asked you what you would ask the candidates at the debate tonight. Let me ask you this. If one or the other becomes president and you had the opportunity to give that new president advice on how to avoid the next pandemic or medical catastrophe, what would you say? Give us a couple of things that you would say coming out of this one, lessons learned, what to do to prevent the next one, or be prepared.
Well, yeah, pandemic readiness, that's for sure. Had we done that, back in December, we would have already had testing capacity built so that we would have, been all over this before it spread throughout the country. So we do need a pandemic awareness program, prevention, and that means investment in public health resources. And in fact, just the opposite was occurring. We were actually taking away funding of these important groups. So we need to go all in on that. And there will be more pandemics in the years ahead, hopefully nothing like we're going through right now. So we should do everything possible to prepare, detect them at the earliest time, get all over it aggressively, not try to be complacent or try to minimize it or playing it down. That's just the opposite of what we need to do.
Dr. Eric Topol, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Great
we'll be right back.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with some final thoughts from our panel. Welcome back. Before we go, Dan and Amanda, anything else you're going to be watching for tonight? Any predictions on what the big story will be tomorrow morning? Let's start with Amanda.
Sure. I mean, again, Trump has set the bar so low for Biden. So I think a lot of the story is just going to be the fact that he read it. I mean, maybe he won't. Maybe it'll be a disaster for a debate. Biden was not the best debater in the primary, although he has been stronger in the past when he was running for VP. So, it's sort of how well does Biden do and whether Trump is able to get under Biden's skin and throw him off course.
Dan.
Yeah. Just picking up on that. I mean, we consume these debates differently than we used to. The video moments are sliced and diced and are all over social media. I would look for some moment that goes viral or gets a lot of attention. One thing I think is possible is that Biden tries to, as Amanda said, get under Trump's skin, but maybe with a little humor, with a grin, lampoon him a bit. I think one possibility would be on the whole taxes issue and kind of teasing him about not being the great mogul that he has always said he is. Maybe he'll offer to lend Trump a little money and see what kind of effect that has.
It's interesting when you think back in history, these debates, presidential debates, there have been some incredible one-liners that are part of popular culture now, right? Where's the beef? There you go again.
There you go again, right.
You're no Jack Kennedy. And I don't know. I mean, Amanda, do you think that these are scripted? I mean, they must be, right?
I mean, to some extent, you obviously, the candidates have their lines that they're supposed to go in and say. Now, whether or not they do, I want to count on Trump, having lines ready to say. He hasn't been doing as much prep as Biden, and Trump always likes to speak off the cuff and say whatever he wants to say. But of course, Biden has been part of really memorable debates back against Sarah Palin. We remember Palin more than Biden, which is actually probably good for Biden in this case. But, I'm excited. I love debates. We have not seen Trump and Biden go head to head. We haven't seen a lot because, of COVID. So this is going to be exciting.
Right. And just one quick word from each of you. Who's going to win? Amanda?
I'm not making a prediction. No way.
Sorry, Andy. Nice try. I'm out of the prediction business.
Well, I'm going to go with you. I'll be with you guys. I'm not going to do it either. But it'll be an interesting night, that's for sure. So that wraps us up for this week's program. We don't have a show actually next week, but we'll be back on October 13th. Up next, a webinar from Yahoo Finance and the Bipartisan Policy Center on what the protracted negotiations over more stimulus is impacting the economy. Stay tuned for that and have fun watching the debate.
due to the coronavirus pandemic. That's an unemployment rate of 8.4%. According to a July survey from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, 70% of small business owners worry about financial hardships due to their business closures. And women are feeling the strain the most. With schools closed and childcare options limited, 25% of women are staying out of work to take care of their kids. For context, that's compared to less than 10% of men. And with the first presidential debate coming up tonight, it's likely we will be hearing from the president and presidential candidate Joe Biden on these issues. So I've given you just some of the statistics, but for a better perspective on how this pandemic is impacting people across the country, I want to start today's conversation with Cynthia Zwick. She's the executive director of the anti-poverty group Wildfire, based in Phoenix, Arizona. Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start on the CARES Act. That expired. Congress is currently stalled over the next package. And in your state of Arizona, extra unemployment benefits of $300 that were authorized by the president through that executive order, they've already run out. I'm wondering if you can explain for us how people are being impacted by this, not just in Arizona, but also across the country.
Sure. Good morning, Kristen. Well, I think it's a fairly significant impact. What we're seeing now is that folks who are eligible for unemployment in Arizona are relying on a $240 a week payment, which is insufficient to live on. We're seeing a lot of folks now who have been sick because of COVID, struggling with health care bills, that particularly those who have been underinsured or uninsured completely. And we're facing a significant eviction crisis here in Arizona, as many other states are facing as well. So this is a really difficult time for a lot of people. Utility companies have suspended disconnections for folks, so there's an opportunity for a whole lot of debt to be aggregating for these families that are continuing to struggle with unemployment generally.
So I know that you just mentioned evictions. I'm wondering, and also debt, but I'm wondering for you, as someone who works in anti-poverty, trying to prevent people from falling into poverty, what is the greatest concern for you as you look forward for the next couple of months?
I think one of the biggest concerns that we have is there doesn't appear to be any federal relief coming to the states. And while the CDC has postponed evictions through the end of the year, as I said, utility companies have now postponed disconnections through the end of the year, we don't see any funding to help those families coming from the federal government, and the states are pretty tapped out. So I think from a couple of month perspective, we have the potential to see hundreds of thousands of people evicted here in Arizona. We have the opportunity to see a lot of people lose their electric service, which affects not only individuals just needing to survive, but kids who are now studying from home.
All right. Well, thank you, Cynthia Zwick. I want to turn now over to our panel. We're joined now by Maddie Doppler, Senior Fellow for Fiscal Policy at the National Taxpayers Union, and economist Betsy Stevenson. She's a former member of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Obama and a former chief economist at the Labor Department. So I want to get right to it. We just heard some of the concerns highlighted by Cynthia. Now, Republicans and Democrats are still trillions of dollars apart on economic relief packages. One of the thornier issues that Jason had been mentioning as a part of that debate is around enhanced unemployment insurance, particularly how much extra money should be doled out to folks in need of that benefit. So Maddie, I want to start with you here, given your experience working in the House Republican Conference. Republicans want reductions in the amount of enhanced UI. We just heard from Cynthia about the poverty crisis that could be looming. I'm wondering, from your perspective, is that the right path for Republicans to be taking, or should they back down on that $600 that Democrats want as a part of the next package?
Well, let's be clear, it would not be a reduction at this point because the expansion of the $600 a week has, of course, expired. So now the conversation is, do we put new benefits on top of the benefits that people are already eligible for at the state level? This was a conversation that took place during the CARES Act debate. So in April, when Congress passed its last COVID relief legislation bill, there were several senators who raised concerns about the fact that a worker could be paid more on unemployment than when they were working. working. Now, I do think, particularly in April, when we did not know the depth of the coronavirus crisis, we did not know how long it was going to beleaguer the economy, and we didn't know a lot about how the economy was going to recover. This was a little bit of a tone-deaf argument. Arguing over whether or not a server should make a couple $100 extra in the depths of a recession, I think, is not necessarily where policymakers need to be concentrating their energy.
We've been broadcasting.
Through this, there are considerations that policymakers are making. One is that over the course of the summer, while the public health situation was certainly worse than most had anticipated, the economic circumstances were much more positive than a lot of estimates had suggested. We certainly saw a resiliency to the American economy on display that I don't think either Congress nor most economic observers were expecting. That to me indicates that there's a lot of work being done here by American businesses, workers, and consumers to figure out how to live life and to engage in commercial activity that, in April, we just simply didn't know how to do before there's a vaccine for the coronavirus. So I think that is a silver lining to the debate now. Now, as policymakers continue to talk about the UI benefit, that is a sticking point, but I would say that the conversation in Washington has actually turned more to this focus on top lines, how much the total package is going to cost. To me, this is a frustration that I think folks across the political spectrum share, which is that we're not using data and we're not talking about the effect of public policy. Whether or not the final bill is $2.3 trillion or $3 trillion doesn't matter if the policy doesn't have the impact that it was intended to have. We just heard from Cynthia about her concerns on the ground in Arizona about preventing homelessness, preventing utilities from being shut off, preventing mortgage foreclosures. What I think policymakers should be doing is looking at their policies and asking whether or not it accomplishes those goals, regardless of the top number. Certainly, prudence in financial policymaking is important, but when you're at a point right now, Fed Chairman Jay Powell, I think, has a great line on this. He says we went from the best employment landscape in nearly in 50 years to one of the worst employment situations in nearly 100 years. That is the acute crisis that we're suffering through right now, and policymakers need to be asking what we can do with tax dollars, with a limited number of tax dollars, but what we can do that gives us the best bang for our buck to ensure that the most number of people are protected during these unprecedented circumstances. Right now, Congress is not asking that question. The administration and House Democrats are continuing to have these negotiations. My hope is that we can move past this argument about top line numbers and have a real conversation about policy that actually provides a social safety net that Americans are looking for as we wade through the fall and the winter, where the public health situation is very much still uncertain.
So Betsy, Maddie obviously hit on a lot of issues just now in her response. I want to pick up on one of them, which is that critique about the enhanced UI, about it being a disincentive to work. We've heard that line repeatedly. You are an economist, you worked at the Labor Department. I'm wondering, one, how we should be approaching the debate specifically around that enhanced UI, but also how should we be approaching the debate? Part of what Maddie just said, that top line number, how we really should instead be thinking about how effective and how efficient some of the policies and programs as a part of that next package should be.
So Maddie and I agree on that, right? We should be looking at what policies are going to be effective and then figuring out how much we really need to spend. You know, the top line number does matter in terms of fiscal policy, how big is the hole we need to fill. But I think that, that's what really mattered in March and April. And what I think we learned from the really incredibly rapid response from Congress with the CARES Act was that when Congress acts, when they immediately do targeted relief that puts money back in people's pockets, they make a huge difference. What we saw in May was that the pandemic was far from over, but the worst of the recession was. And that was really directly a result of the amount of money that was handed to people. And they were able to pick their spending back up because spending had fallen off a cliff, not because of shutdowns, but because people were terrified not just of getting COVID, but terrified of not being able to pay their bills, not being able to put food on the table. And so they really cut back on all sorts of spending. So I think what we're looking at right now is asking the question, what do we need to be giving people who are unemployed? We still would benefit a lot from getting money to people who are unemployed. Those are some of the hardest hit folks. So I think going through the unemployment insurance system does actually match our goal of targeting to people who need money, right? Other policies like, cutting payroll taxes is targeting the wrong people. Those are the people who kept their job. We want to be targeting the people who've lost their job. So how much money should we give them? The problem is our unemployment insurance system is kind of broken, right? It doesn't give people very much. You often hear that it gives people 50% of their pay, but that's only up to a cap, and that cap varies across states. And I would say the typical person earning median earnings in the United States is maybe getting a third of their pay through unemployment insurance, and that's just too little. It's too little to have them not face foreclosures and hunger and all the kinds of problems we've heard about. So what do we need to do? It would be great if we had a UI system where we could just dial it up and say, let's hit people at 100% of their pay because that's what they deserve right now. Unfortunately, we don't. And I think that's a problem that I hope we could actually address at some point. But until then, I think we do need to be aiming to getting people something close to 100% of their salary. Because right now, there's so many people unemployed that there are plenty of people to take the jobs. Our problem is all the people who don't have jobs.
Betsy, I want to move over now to childcare because obviously if businesses are able to stay open, people are able to keep their jobs. I mentioned a little bit earlier that unfortunately women are suffering in this area, 25% of them choosing to stay out of work to take care of their children. I'm wondering if you are concerned that because of childcare, that we could be setting back women who are already struggling with a wage gap for years to come because of this pandemic? And how should Congress approach childcare issues in any future stimulus packages?
In December, women hit really a milestone, which was there became the majority of non-farm payroll job holders. And they held that position in January and February, and they were really on track for that kind of growth to continue. Women have invested more in education than men for several decades. They have increased their job tenure and experience on the job to be equal of that of men, and in some cases, obviously exceeding. And they have increasingly become equal earners in the home, and sometimes top earners in the home at higher rates. So we have women having really come into their own in the economy, and then the pandemic hit, and they got hit really extra hard in two ways. One was, I really call it a gendered shutdown, because the industries that shut down unfortunately, though, that's now not a blessing, it's a curse. They can't take new jobs. There are a lot of women who haven't gone back to work. Their employer said, okay, we're going to open the office. And they're like, I got nowhere to put my kid. And so they're the one who doesn't go back. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing a lot of employers, they're going back to maybe 90% staff. And hey, it's okay because the 10% who aren't coming back really can't because they've got these kids at home. The problem I see is, as that lasts a long time, we know that when women stay out of the labor force for a long time, it becomes harder for them to get back in. It means that they're going to be on a lower career trajectory, a lower wage trajectory, probably for the rest of their life. And as these women are at home taking care of their kids, they're also starting to potentially struggle with elder care issues. And they may find by the time their kids go fully back to school, which may not be until the fall of 2021, that they've also taken on other caregiving responsibilities in their family, and there's just not the bandwidth to go back to work. And so I am very frightened that women have set themselves back decades. What we see is women's labor force participation is where it was in the mid 80s, right? So where are we today? It's 2020, and women have tumbled all the way back to the mid 80s. And it's going to be a struggle to get us back to 2020. So I am extremely concerned about this. Childcare employment remains 20% below where it was at the peak. So 1 in 5 childcare workers have not gone back. And we already had a shortage. And what we've learned about the virus is that it's airborne, right? And that's what's really become clear over time. And so we talk about the winter months. I think a lot of parents are going to feel nervous and concerned about putting their kids back in facilities that perhaps really haven't done the investment necessary to ensure that they have the airflow that can mean their kids stay healthy. I mean, look, when I had kids, the first thing I joked about was putting them in childcare, was putting them in, a petri dish of germs, and we were all going to be sick all winter long. We all know that's what childcare is about. It's about bringing the germs home. And now the germs are actually much more dangerous than they've ever been. And I think a lot of families are wrestling with that. It's a really difficult situation. And so I am incredibly concerned about what this is going to mean. And really, Congress isn't doing enough. I've seen what Congress can do when it wants to save an industry. Look what it did for the banks in 2008. Look what it's done for the airlines. It's got to say that childcare is as important a part of our economy as banks were and are. And it's got to say that childcare is as important as airlines, and it needs to make it a priority. It needs to bend over backwards to make sure that they can do the infrastructure improvements that they need to be able to bring kids back safely, to be able to boost employment, to ensure that wages and training for childcare improve in a way that will attract women back and that will make families feel safe putting their kids back in childcare. And this is going to be not just what we need to do right now, but what we're going to have to be putting a lot of our energy towards over the next year or two is building back up our childcare infrastructure so that we can, and helping women who've stepped out of the labor force get back in and get back to where they were before.
Now, Maddie, obviously, Betsy raising a lot of alarm bells. And as she just mentioned, Congress can do more and should do more. This is something that you've also said throughout this discussion. But I want to turn now to the White House. We have a presidential debate tonight. The election is just 35 days away. I'm wondering, in your mind, what do you think needs to be a priority for the next administration, whether it is a Trump administration or a Biden administration? What should they prioritize as soon as the election is over and they take office to really support any recovery going forward?
Well, the only thing I disagree with what Betsy said is that I don't think the childcare question when it comes to public policy is going to be pervasive for the next year. I think it needs to be front and center for the next 10 years until we get it right. I'm one of those people who has a 1-year-old at home wondering why it took a pandemic for all of a sudden the rest of the country to realize that unless we support families, we can never get to the full economic recovery. But that was the conversation all summer, right? All of a sudden, these families who hadn't had to contemplate what they do with their kids because school had always been an option for them to get older kids, we're saying, well, wait a second, we can't have a full economic recovery until kids go back to school. That's absolutely correct. But in this country, it's a proposition that we force people with kids under 5 to reconcile with every single day. So I do, if there's one silver lining here, I hope that it's public policymakers on all ends of the spectrum start to acknowledge that childcare is a crucial component of infrastructure for not only a healthy economy, but for a robust and prosperous economy for all Americans. This is something that can help start bringing down some of the achievement gaps that we see in our country. But moving on to your point about the administration, it's an interesting time for this presidential election because what we see in polling and data indicates that Americans see coronavirus as a once-in-a-lifetime event, which it likely is. As a result, though, they see the current economic conditions as temporary. So a lot of people who are already convinced they want to vote either for the first time in Trump, that position because what he did for me. But they attribute to what he's done to having a strong economy up until last year, they see right now as being anachronistic and that eventually the recovery will get us back to where we need to be. The other side, of course, of that is what I think we'll see Vice President Biden argue today, which is that this was avoidable. We didn't have to have as much of an economic collapse in dealing with the coronavirus as we did. And the reason that we're in these dire circumstances now is because we didn't have the public policy in place to support such acute circumstances. And I think both sides actually are right. I think the argument can be made to both sides of the political ledger that, these circumstances either could have been avoidable or could have been worse if the economy had been in worse shape in 2019. So it'll be interesting to see how they can do that today with the first debate and in the coming weeks. I do that, typically what we see are Americans, their opinions on the economy crystallize a lot sooner in an election cycle. By this point, most Americans would have their minds made up about how they feel about their own economic circumstances, and as a result, how they would vote in a presidential. I think that in this year, what we'll see is candidates can really run all the way up to the post in order to make that argument to Americans up until election day.
All right. Well, I will have to leave that there. That was a great talk. I want to thank both Maddie and Betsy for participating. I'm going to send this now back over to you, Jason. I wish we had more time. There were so many more topics that we wanted to get into, for example, around state funding. But unfortunately, as always happens, not enough time to get through all of the topics that we wanted to chat. So I'll send it now back to you.
Well, thank you, Kristen. Key to the Bipartisan Policy Center is always keep wanting more, and that's why we're delighted that this is just the first in a series of discussions we'll be co-hosting with Yahoo Finance. I want to just share your thanks to Maddie, Betsy, and Cynthia for a really great discussion. I think it revealed what we know, which is the economy is at an inflection point. And I think the revelation that our ambivalent recovery is kind of barreling towards a cliff when it comes to small businesses, out of work folks, and I think the real focus on childcare is very important. That's something that the Bipartisan Policy Center has cared and thought about a lot. I want to suggest if anyone is interested, they hop on bipartisanpolicy.org, where we have a number of specific recommendations on childcare and unemployment insurance and some other of the key points of contention. True to the Bipartisan Policy Center, we are proposing ideas that have resonance with the core beliefs and ideologies of both parties. And so we hopefully encourage the Congress to step up and engage what we know is a continuing crisis. So with that, on behalf of the Bipartisan Policy Center and Yahoo Finance, thank you for joining us. Our next segment is going to be on tax policy in the 2020 election. And I hope that this conversation was a little bit of a warm-up for what's going to be, I'm sure, a rather special presidential debate starting just in a few hours. So Kristen, thank you so much.